$500 for the boy. Who'll give me 500? Jeremiah Wilson's voice carried across the dusty square of Rattlesnake Creek, his words slurring slightly from the whiskey he'd consumed to steel his nerves. He yanked roughly on the rope, binding his 12-year-old son Samuel's wrists, causing the boy to stumble forward. "Pa, please," Samuel whispered, his voice breaking. Tears cut clean trails through the dust on his sunburned cheeks. "Don't do this." Jeremiah refused to meet his son's eyes. "Quiet boy, 400 then. He's strong for his age, works hard." It was high noon in the Texas Territory, 1872. The punishing sun beat down on the small crowd gathered outside Hargrove's general store, most watching in uncomfortable silence as a man tried to sell his own flesh and blood to cover his gambling debts. "This ain't right, Wilson," Sheriff Miller called out, though he made no move to intervene. "There's other ways to settle what you owe Blackwood." "Not according to Blackwood there ain't," Jeremiah shot back, nodding toward a well-dressed man watching from the shade of the saloon porch. James Blackwood, owner of the Red Ace Saloon and the territory's most notorious gambling den, observed the proceedings with cold detachment, flanked by two armed men. From the shadows between the gunsmith's shop and the livery stable, a pair of dark, watchful eyes observed the unfolding cruelty. Swift Hawk, a Lipan Apache trader known to occasionally barter with the townspeople, felt his hand instinctively move to the knife at his belt. Among his people, children were sacred. What he witnessed now made his blood boil beneath his impassive exterior. $300. Jeremiah was growing desperate, pulling Samuel around like merchandise at a cattle auction. "The boy's mother is gone, and I can't keep him." "He'll earn his keep." 3 months earlier, Samuel's mother had died of fever. With nothing to dull his grief but whiskey and cards, Jeremiah had spiraled into debt, losing what little they had and more to Blackwood's rigged games. Now Judgment Day had come, and in his cowardice he'd chosen to sacrifice his son rather than himself. Samuel had stopped struggling, his small shoulders slumped in resignation. He'd watched his father change from a once loving parent to this hollow-eyed stranger who now sought to sell him to the highest bidder. The boy's eyes scanned the crowd, searching for sympathy, for someone, anyone, willing to speak up. 250, called a voice from the back. Edgar Hargrove, the miserly store owner, stepped forward. "But I want to see the boy work first. Prove he's worth it." Jeremiah's face lit up. "Of course. Samuel, show Mr. Hargrove how strong you are. Pick up that crate there." The boy didn't move. "I said pick it up, boy," Jeremiah hissed, jerking the rope again. Swift Hawk had seen enough. He moved silently through the crowd, his presence causing people to step aside instinctively. Most settlers in Rattlesnake Creek still viewed natives with suspicion at best, hatred at worst. But Swift Hawk's trading relationships had earned him a wary tolerance. "This is not the way of a father." Swift Hawk's accented voice cut through the murmurs of the crowd. He stood directly before Jeremiah now, his tall frame imposing despite his lean build. The crowd fell silent. Jeremiah blinked, momentarily taken aback, then recovered with a sneer. "Stay out of white man's business, Apache," he spat. "The boy's mine to do with as I please." Swift Hawk's dark eyes shifted to Samuel, noting the boy's raw wrists where the rope had cut into his skin, the bruise blooming on his cheek, the hollowness in eyes too young to know such betrayal. "A child is not property," Swift Hawk said, each word measured and clear. "Among my people, to harm a child is to poison your own spirit." Jeremiah's hand moved to the pistol at his hip. "I'm warning you." In a motion too swift for most eyes to follow, Swift Hawk's knife appeared in his hand. Before Jeremiah could draw, the blade flashed, severing the rope that bound Samuel to his father. "Run, boy," Swift Hawk commanded, not taking his eyes off Jeremiah. Samuel hesitated only a moment before bolting toward the edge of the crowd. Jeremiah lunged after him, but Swift Hawk moved with the fluid grace of a mountain lion, placing himself between father and son. "You'll pay for this interference." Jeremiah's face contorted with rage as he drew his pistol. The crowd scattered, mothers pulling children behind buildings, men diving for cover. Swift Hawk didn't flinch. "The debt you owe cannot be paid with your son's freedom." Sheriff Miller's voice rang out. "Put the gun down, Wilson. Think about what you're doing." Blackwood stepped forward from his place on the porch, his refined southern accent cutting through the tension. "Mr. Wilson, while I admire your creative approach to settling your marker, I believe this spectacle has gone on long enough." His cold eyes surveyed the scene with distaste. "I have a reputation to consider." "But you said—" Jeremiah began, gun still trained on Swift Hawk. "I said I wanted payment. I never specified the method." Blackwood straightened his silk waistcoat. "Put the gun away before you add murder to your list of poor decisions today." Jeremiah's hand trembled, the pistol wavering. Swift Hawk stood perfectly still, his eyes never leaving the desperate man's face. "You've one day to come up with my money," Blackwood continued, "or I'll have my men collect it from whatever remains of your worthless hide." With that, he nodded to his companions and returned to the saloon. Jeremiah's resolve crumbled. His arm dropped, the pistol hanging limply at his side. "What have I done?" he whispered, the reality of his actions finally penetrating his alcohol-fogged mind. "My boy, my Samuel?" Swifthawk's expression remained impassive, but his voice carried a deep certainty. "You have broken what should never be broken, the trust between father and son." Samuel had stopped at the edge of the crowd, watching the confrontation with wide eyes. When his father's gaze found him, the boy turned and ran, disappearing down an alley between buildings. Jeremiah moved to follow, but Swifthawk caught his arm in an iron grip. "Let him go. You have lost the right to call him son this day. Who are you to judge me?" Jeremiah wrenched his arm free, anger flaring again. "You don't know what it's like, losing everything, watching your wife die, drowning in debt." "I know loss," Swifthawk cut him off. "My wife, my daughter, my entire village taken by your army's disease-laden blankets. Yet I would die before selling a child of my blood." The crowd had begun to disperse. The immediate danger passed, but many still watched the confrontation from a safe distance. Sheriff Miller approached cautiously. "Where's the boy gone to?" he asked, looking around. Swifthawk released Jeremiah's arm. "To find a safer place than beside this man." "He's my son," Jeremiah protested. "I have rights." "Rights?" Jacob Turner, the elderly blacksmith, stepped forward. Respected for his fairness and wisdom, he was one of the few men in town willing to trade honestly with the native population. "You forfeit those rights when you put a price on your boy's head, Wilson." Sheriff Miller sighed heavily. "Turner's right. I ought to lock you up for what you tried here today, though there's no law specifically against it." He glanced at Swifthawk. "We need to find the boy before nightfall. These hills aren't safe for a child alone." Swifthawk nodded once. "I will find him." "Now wait just a minute," Jeremiah began, but the sheriff cut him off. "You've done enough, Wilson. Get yourself sober and think about what kind of man you want to be if your boy comes back." As the sheriff led the protesting Jeremiah away, Swifthawk turned to Turner. "The boy will need shelter when found." Turner nodded without hesitation. "My door is open. Martha and I never had children of our own. We'd welcome him for as long as needed." "I go now," Swifthawk said, already moving toward the alley where Samuel had disappeared. "Before the boy travels too far." "Why do you care so much about a white child?" Turner asked quietly. Swifthawk paused, his eyes distant with memory. "Many winters ago, when I was no older than that boy, my people were starving. A white settler shared his food with us when others would have let us die. One kindness makes path for another to follow." He met Turner's gaze. "And children should be protected no matter their skin." With that, Swifthawk followed Samuel's trail, reading the signs only a skilled tracker would notice. A disturbed pebble here, a scuff mark there, a partial footprint in the dust, leading toward the creek that gave the town its name. He found the boy huddled beneath a gnarled cottonwood by the water's edge, knees drawn up to his chest, eyes vacant with shock. Swifthawk approached slowly, making enough noise that Samuel would not be startled. "They will not hurt you now," Swifthawk said, crouching a respectful distance away. Samuel looked up, his face streaked with dirt and tears. "Why?" The single word contained a universe of pain. "Why would he try to sell me? I'm his son." Swifthawk considered his answer carefully. "Some men lose their way. The spirit that makes them fathers becomes poisoned by drink, by gambling, by grief." "He wasn't always like this," Samuel whispered. "Before Ma died." Swifthawk nodded. "Grief changes many hearts. Some grow stronger, like trees after fire. Others crack and break. What happens to me now?" The boy's voice was small, lost. "The blacksmith and his wife offer you home," Swifthawk replied. "They are good people, honest people." Samuel stared at the gentle current of the creek. "And my father?" Swifthawk did not offer false comfort. "That path is for him to choose. He must find his way back to himself before he can be father again." The boy was silent for a long moment. "I have nowhere else to go," he admitted finally. Swifthawk reached out slowly and cut the remaining rope from Samuel's wrists. "Sometimes, the path forward begins when the ropes that bind us are cut." As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, Swifthawk and Samuel walked back toward town. The boy kept a wary distance at first, but gradually moved closer to the Apache's side. In Rattlesnake Creek, whispers and speculation followed their progress. The sight of a Lipan Apache warrior walking beside a white child, protecting rather than threatening, challenged many deeply held beliefs. Outside the blacksmith's shop, Martha Turner waited, a kind-faced woman with silver-streaked hair. She didn't hesitate to open her arms to Samuel. "Come in, child. I've stew on the fire and a bed made up for you." Samuel looked uncertainly to Swifthawk, who nodded encouragement. "You are safe here." As Martha guided Samuel inside, Jacob Turner turned to Swifthawk. "You've done a good thing today. Not many would have interfered." Swifthawk's eyes moved to the saloon where Jeremiah Wilson could be seen through the window, already drinking away his shame and regret. One rope cut today, but the father remains tied by stronger bonds of his own making. Turner followed his gaze. "Do you think he can change?" Swifthawk adjusted the knife at his belt. "That is for the Great Spirit to know, but the journey of redemption is long and hard." His expression hardened. "And if he threatens the boy again, he will answer to me." As darkness fell over Rattlesnake Creek, Swifthawk disappeared into the shadows from which he had emerged, but the townspeople knew he wouldn't go far. Not while Samuel needed protection from the man who should have treasured him most. In the distance, coyotes called to one another under the vast canopy of stars, their voices echoing across the desert landscape. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, at least, the ropes binding an innocent child had been cut. 3 days had passed since Jeremiah Wilson had attempted to sell his son in Rattlesnake Creek's dusty square. 3 days of whispers behind hands, of meaningful glances when Jeremiah staggered from the Red Ace Saloon to his dilapidated cabin at the edge of town. 3 days of Samuel waking in the night, crying out from nightmares in which his father's face twisted with contempt as he tightened ropes around his son's wrists. The morning sun had barely crested the eastern hills when Samuel emerged from the Turner's blacksmith shop, carrying a bucket toward the well in the center of town. His raw wrists were now bandaged with clean cloth, and Martha Turner's hearty cooking had already begun to fill the hollow spaces in his cheeks. Still, his eyes remained wary, constantly scanning his surroundings, flinching at sudden movements. "You're up early, boy," called Sheriff Miller, tipping his hat as he made his morning rounds. Samuel nodded respectfully, but said nothing. His trust in authority had been shattered, along with his faith in his father. "Your pa's been asking after you," the sheriff continued, his weathered face softening. "Says he wants to apologize." Samuel's knuckles whitened around the bucket handle. "I don't want to see him." Sheriff Miller sighed, scratching at his gray-streaked beard. "Can't say I blame you. What he did was, well, there ain't words for it." He glanced toward the hills that rose to the north. "That Apache still around?" "Swifthawk comes at sunset," Samuel replied, his voice barely audible. "He brings Mr. Turner furs to trade and checks on me." The sheriff nodded slowly. "Strange times we live in when an Apache shows more decency than a white man toward his own blood." He cleared his throat awkwardly. "Well, you take care now. The Turners are good folk." As the sheriff moved on, Samuel continued to the well. The town was beginning to stir, shopkeepers opening their doors, a wagon laden with supplies creaking down the main street, 2 women carrying laundry baskets toward the creek. Normal life continuing as if his world hadn't shattered 3 days ago. From the window of the Red Ace Saloon, James Blackwood watched the boy with calculating eyes. Behind him, Jeremiah Wilson slept, head on a table amid empty whiskey glasses. Blackwood straightened his silk waistcoat and adjusted his cuffs, contemplating the unexpected complication the Apache had introduced into his plans. "Wake him," Blackwood ordered one of his men, nodding toward Jeremiah. The burly enforcer dumped a pitcher of water over Jeremiah's head, causing him to sputter and jerk upright, eyes bloodshot and confused. "Your time's up, Wilson," Blackwood said coolly. "I don't see my $500. Jeremiah wiped his face with a trembling hand. "I told you, Blackwood. I need more time. I can get the money." "Your creative solution the other day was quite the spectacle," Blackwood interrupted, examining his manicured nails. "Pity that savage interfered. The boy would have fetched a fair price from Hargrove." "I wasn't thinking straight," Jeremiah muttered, shame and resentment warring on his haggard face. The whiskey didn't tie those ropes." Blackwood's voice hardened. "You did, and now you've become a liability. Your pathetic display has drawn unwanted attention to my establishment." Fear flickered across Jeremiah's face. "What are you saying?" Blackwood smiled without warmth. "I'm saying you have until sundown to bring me what you owe, or my men will extract payment in other ways, perhaps starting with those fingers you're so fond of using at my card tables." Across town, in Jacob Turner's blacksmith shop, the rhythmic ringing of hammer on anvil filled the air. Turner was teaching Samuel the rudiments of the trade, showing him how to pump the bellows and hold the tongs properly. "The metal remembers every stroke," Turner explained, his strong arms guiding Samuel's smaller ones. "Too hard and it shatters, too soft and it never takes shape." Samuel watched, fascinated, as the glowing iron yielded to Turner's skilled hands. "Like people?" he asked quietly. Turner paused, studying the boy with surprise and approval. That's right, son. Some get hardened by life's hammer blows, others get shaped by them. He dipped the red-hot metal into a water barrel, sending up a cloud of steam. The difference is often in who's doing the shaping. Martha Turner appeared at the workshop door, wiping flour from her hands onto her apron. That Apache is here again, she announced, her voice holding no fear, only mild curiosity. Samuel's face brightened for the first time that day. He looked to Turner, who nodded permission, and the boy hurried into the house. Swifthawk stood just inside the door, his tall frame seeming too large for the modest home. At his feet lay a bundle of prime furs and a string of rabbits. "You bring too much," Martha protested, though she accepted the rabbits with a grateful nod. "We're not charging the boy rent." Swifthawk's expression remained impassive. "Trade is good, fair payment for boy's food." His dark eyes moved to Samuel, assessing. "So you sleep better?" Samuel shook his head honestly. "I still see him in my dreams." Swifthawk nodded as if this was expected. "The wounds of betrayal heal slow, like snake bite. Poison must work through body first." Martha exchanged a glance with her husband, who had followed Samuel inside. "We've been thinking," she began hesitantly. "The boy needs schooling. There's a schoolhouse in Junction City, 20 miles east. My sister lives there. Could take him in." "No." Samuel's response was immediate, panic flaring in his eyes. "I want to stay here." His gaze moved to Swifthawk. "I want to learn from you, too. How to track, how to move silently, how to be brave." An uncomfortable silence followed. Finally, Jacob cleared his throat. "It's not proper, Martha and me being no relation to the boy. People will talk." "People already talk," Martha countered. "Let them." She knelt before Samuel, her kind face serious. "But your father is still your legal guardian, child, unless he agrees or—" She trailed off. "Or he proves himself unfit beyond doubt," Jacob finished grimly. Swifthawk had remained silent during this exchange, but now he spoke. "The father comes." They all turned toward the window. Sure enough, Jeremiah Wilson was approaching the blacksmith's shop, his gait unsteady but purposeful. Samuel instinctively stepped behind Swifthawk, whose hand moved to rest lightly on his knife hilt. Jacob moved to the door. "I'll handle this." Outside, Jeremiah stopped at the sight of Jacob's imposing figure blocking the doorway, arms folded across his broad chest. "I've come to see my boy," Jeremiah announced, his voice carrying a forced bravado. "He doesn't want to see you," Jacob replied flatly. Jeremiah's face darkened. "He's my son, Turner. The law says many things," Jacob cut him off, "including that a father who endangers his child can lose his rights." From inside, Samuel watched the confrontation, his heart pounding. Martha placed a protective hand on his shoulder, while Swifthawk remained motionless, observing. "I made a mistake," Jeremiah's voice cracked. "I was desperate. Blackwood was going to kill me if I didn't pay." "So you offered your son instead?" Jacob's voice dripped with disgust. "A man protects his children at all costs. He doesn't use them as currency." Jeremiah's shoulders slumped. For a moment, genuine remorse seemed to break through his defensive posture. "I need to talk to him, please, just for a minute." Jacob hesitated, then turned to look at Samuel through the open door. "It's your choice, boy. You don't have to." Every instinct told Samuel to refuse, to hide, to never face his father again. But something in Jeremiah's broken stance stirred the memory of better days, of a father who had once taught him to fish, who had carried him on his shoulders at the county fair before his mother's death, before the whiskey took hold. "It's all right," Samuel said, his voice small but steady. "I'll hear what he has to say." Swifthawk's expression didn't change, but he moved slightly, positioning himself where he could intervene instantly if needed. Martha squeezed Samuel's shoulder and whispered, "We'll be right here." Samuel stepped onto the porch, maintaining a safe distance from his father. Up close, Jeremiah looked worse than he had 3 days ago. Unshaven, unwashed, his eyes haunted and desperate. "Samuel," Jeremiah began, his voice hoarse. "Son, Don't call me that," Samuel interrupted, a flash of anger breaking through his fear. "You gave up the right." Jeremiah flinched as if struck. "I deserve that. I deserve worse." He ran a trembling hand through his dirty hair. "I came to say I'm sorry, though sorry don't begin to cover what I did." Samuel said nothing, his young face set in lines too old for his years. "I've been a poor excuse for a father since your mama died," Jeremiah continued. "The drink, the gambling, I let grief poison everything good in me." He took a step forward, causing Samuel to tense. Jeremiah froze, pain crossing his features at his son's fear of him. "Blackwood's given me until sundown to pay my debt," Jeremiah said, his voice dropping. $500 I ain't got. He'll kill me, Samuel. Or worse. Understanding dawned on Samuel's face. You didn't come to apologize. You came because you need help. Jeremiah's expression crumbled. No, He stopped, unable to maintain the lie. Yes, but I am sorry, son. More sorry than you'll ever know. From the doorway, Swifthawk spoke, causing Jeremiah to start. How you seek the boy's forgiveness to ease your spirit before you die, not to heal his wounds. Jeremiah whirled to face the Apache, anger flaring. This isn't your affair, savage. Swifthawk stepped onto the porch, his presence commanding despite his lean frame. You made it my affair when you tried to sell a child like cattle, when you broke the most sacred bond the Great Spirit creates. What would you have me do? Jeremiah demanded, desperation making his voice rise. Let Blackwood's men cut me to pieces? They're not just after the money anymore. I'm a liability to him now. That is the path you chose, Swifthawk replied without sympathy. Each step led you here. The whiskey, the cards, the debts, the ropes around your son's wrists. Samuel had been watching this exchange, his expression troubled. Despite everything, some small part of him still cared what happened to his father. Is there no way to pay Blackwood? He asked quietly. Hope flickered in Jeremiah's bloodshot eyes. If I had a stake, I could win it back. I know I could. I've been lucky before. Fool! Jacob spat from behind them. That's what got you here in the first place. Martha stepped forward. What about the claim? Your silver claim up in the hills? You were always boasting about how rich it would make you someday. Jeremiah's face twisted. It's worthless. I've worked it for months and found nothing but fool's gold and rocks. Swifthawk's eyes narrowed slightly. You speak with forked tongue. What? Jeremiah bristled. 2 moons ago, you traded silver ore for supplies at Hargrove's store, Swifthawk stated. I was there. The silver was pure, not from a worthless claim. A tense silence followed this revelation. Jeremiah's eyes darted around, looking for escape. You found silver, Samuel realized, his voice hollow with fresh betrayal. And you still gambled away our money? Still tried to sell me? It's not what you think, Jeremiah protested weakly. The vein is small, hard to work without proper equipment. Yet another lie, Jacob said disgustedly. I think we've heard enough. Samuel turned away, his small shoulders rigid with hurt. Go, Pa. Just go. Samuel, please. Jeremiah reached for his son, but Swifthawk moved between them, his stance making it clear that touching the boy would be a grave mistake. The sun travels west, Swifthawk said coldly. Your time grows short, Wilson. If you have silver in your claim, perhaps that is your answer, not your son. A calculating look crossed Jeremiah's face. I'd need help to dig out enough by sundown. Strongbacks. His gaze moved from Jacob to Swifthawk. Help me, and I'll sign whatever papers you want. Guardianship of the boy, whatever you ask. The naked bargaining of his future made Samuel flinch. Jacob placed a protective hand on the boy's shoulder. You truly understand nothing of being a father, the blacksmith said quietly. Swifthawk studied Jeremiah for a long moment. I will help you dig this silver, he said finally. Not for you, for the boy. So he does not carry the weight of your death even if you deserve it. Relief washed over Jeremiah's face, but Swifthawk wasn't finished. But hear me, Wilson. If this is another lie, another scheme, I will not stop Blackwood's men. I will watch as they take their payment from your flesh. The brutality of the statement, delivered in Swifthawk's calm, measured voice, sent a chill through everyone present. Jeremiah swallowed hard and nodded. The claim is 4 miles north, in the Red Canyon, he said. We'll need picks, shovels, dynamite if you've got it. Jacob disappeared into his workshop, returning moments later with tools. I'm coming too, he announced. Someone needs to keep an eye on both of you. As the men prepared to leave, Samuel stood frozen on the porch, conflicting emotions battling across his young face. Finally, he spoke up. I want to come. No, all 3 men said in unison. It's my future you're deciding, Samuel insisted, a spark of his former spirit shining through. I've worked that claim with Pa before. I know where the good rock is. The men exchanged glances. Finally, Swifthawk nodded. The boy has earned the right to witness this. It could be dangerous, Jacob protested. If Blackwood's men, I will keep him safe, Swifthawk stated with quiet certainty. Martha began packing food and water, her movements efficient despite her worried expression. Within 30 minutes, the unlikely party set out. A desperate father, a protective blacksmith, a vigilant Apache, and a boy caught between childhood's end and an uncertain future. The Red Canyon lived up to its name, its towering walls glowing like fresh blood in the midday sun. Jeremiah's claim was marked by a crude wooden sign and the black mouth of a mine shaft cut into the canyon wall. Tools and broken equipment lay scattered about, evidence of previous work. The vein is about 50 feet in, Jeremiah explained, lighting a lantern. follows a quartz seam running northeast. They worked in tense silence, the only sounds the strike of picks against stone and their labored breathing in the close confines of the tunnel. Samuel helped by carrying smaller pieces of ore to the sorting pile outside, where Swift Hawk examined each fragment with expert eyes, separating worthless rock from valuable silver-bearing ore. As the shadows lengthened, indicating the approach of Blackwood's deadline, Jacob emerged from the mine, wiping sweat from his brow. "There's a good vein in there, right enough," he admitted grudgingly. "Enough to cover what you owe Blackwood and then some." Jeremiah followed, his face streaked with dirt and cautious hope. "I told you, with enough men working it." "Why did you hide this?" Samuel interrupted, his young voice hard with accusation. "We could have paid our debts, could have rebuilt after Ma died. Instead, you drank and gambled and—" his voice broke, "and tried to sell me." Jeremiah couldn't meet his son's eyes. "The silver, it was my secret, my chance to be somebody, not just another dirt farmer who couldn't save his wife." His voice dropped to a whisper. "I wanted to build something grand, to make your mother proud. Instead, I lost myself." Swift Hawk had been silently assessing the pile of ore. "This will be enough," he announced. "If Blackwood is honest in his dealings." A harsh laugh escaped Jeremiah. "Blackwood, honest? He'll take the silver and still want blood." "Mine or—" He cut himself off, glancing at Samuel. Swift Hawk's eyes narrowed. "Or the boys?" At Jeremiah's telling silence, the Apache's hand moved to his knife. "You have made more deals with this man? Speak truth now." Before Jeremiah could answer, the distinctive sound of approaching horses echoed through the canyon. Jacob quickly pulled Samuel behind a large boulder, while Swift Hawk melted into the shadows with the silent efficiency of a lifetime spent surviving in hostile territory. 4 riders appeared at the canyon entrance, Blackwood himself flanked by 3 armed men. They reined in before the mine entrance, dust settling around their horses' hooves. "Well, well," Blackwood called out, his refined southern drawl echoing off the canyon walls. "It seems our desperate friend has been holding out on us." His cold eyes took in the pile of silver ore. "And here I thought you were simply a worthless drunk, Wilson." Jeremiah stepped forward, hands raised placatingly. "I have your money, Blackwood. The ore is worth twice what I owe you." Blackwood dismounted with fluid grace, adjusting his tailored jacket. "Indeed, which raises the question of why you would attempt to sell your own flesh and blood rather than simply mining your claim." He glanced around. "And where is the boy? I find myself curious about a child worth $500. "He's not here," Jeremiah said quickly, "and he's not part of our deal anymore." A dangerous smile played across Blackwood's lips. "On the contrary, our arrangement has evolved." He nodded to his men, who spread out, rifles ready. "The silver covers your original debt, but your pathetic display in town has created considerable problems for my establishment. Respectability is essential to my operations, you understand." Cold realization dawned on Jeremiah's face. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that your debt is paid, but your usefulness has ended." Blackwood examined his manicured nails casually. "However, I still find myself in need of a young worker for my new venture in Santa Fe. Boys can access the narrower tunnels, you see. Most valuable." From his hiding place, Samuel felt a chill run through him. Jacob's hand tightened on his shoulder. "You never intended to kill me," Jeremiah whispered. "You wanted my son all along, for your mines." Blackwood's smile was shark-like. "Dead men can't be manipulated, Wilson. But men who believe their lives are in danger, they'll offer up anything, even their children." He glanced at the silver ore. "Though I admit, this is a pleasant surprise. I'll take both." "No," Jeremiah said, a new resolve hardening his voice. "Take the silver. Take me if you have to, but you will not take my son." Blackwood sighed theatrically. "This newfound paternal devotion is touching, if belated." He nodded to his men. "Find the boy. He must be nearby." As Blackwood's men began searching the canyon, a tense silence fell. Samuel huddled behind the boulder, heart pounding in his ears. Jacob gripped a heavy wrench, ready to defend the child if discovered. The standoff was broken by a blood-chilling war cry that echoed through the canyon. Swift Hawk launched himself from a ledge above, landing with cat-like grace behind one of Blackwood's men. Before the startled gunman could react, the Apache had relieved him of his weapon and sent him sprawling in the dust. "Apache!" one of the other men shouted, swinging his rifle around. What followed was a blur of violence. Swift Hawk moved like water between boulders and shadows, appearing and disappearing, creating confusion among Blackwood's men. Jacob seized the opportunity to emerge from hiding, swinging his wrench with blacksmith strength, catching another gunman in the shoulder with a sickening crack. Blackwood himself drew a silver-plated pistol, his aristocratic composure finally slipping. Enough of this farce. The gunshot echoed off the canyon walls like thunder. Jeremiah Wilson staggered backward, a look of surprise crossing his face as he pressed his hands to his chest, blood seeping between his fingers. "Puh!" Samuel's anguished cry gave away his position. He bolted from behind the boulder toward his fallen father. "Samuel, no!" Jacob shouted, but it was too late. Blackwood turned, a triumphant smile spreading across his face as he saw the boy. "There you are." He raised his pistol again, this time aiming at Jacob. "Stay where you are, blacksmith, or join Wilson in hell." Samuel reached his father, falling to his knees beside him. "Pa, don't die." Tears streamed down his face as Jeremiah's blood stained the canyon floor. Jeremiah looked up at his son with fading eyes. "Samuel, I'm sorry, so sorry." His breath came in wet gasps. "Should have been better." "How touching," Blackwood mocked, approaching with his pistol still trained on Jacob. "A deathbed reconciliation. But we really must be going now, boy. Your father's debt may be paid, but you and I have business in Santa Fe." "He's not going anywhere with you," Jacob growled. Blackwood's smile was cold. "I have the gun, old man. I make the decisions here." "No," came Swift Hawk's voice from somewhere above. "You do not." The whistle of an arrow cut the air. Blackwood screamed, dropping to one knee as the shaft buried itself in his thigh. His pistol fired wildly as he fell, the bullet ricocheting off stone. Swift Hawk appeared on a ledge above, another arrow nocked and ready. Blackwood's remaining man threw down his weapon, raising his hands in surrender. "Kill them!" Blackwood shouted through gritted teeth, trying to stem the blood flowing from his leg. "Kill them all!" But his man backed away, shaking his head. "Not for what you're paying me. Not against an Apache." The canyon fell silent except for Jeremiah's labored breathing and Blackwood's pained curses. Samuel cradled his father's head, his young face streaked with tears and dirt. "Stay with me, Pa," he pleaded. "Please." Swift Hawk descended from the ledge, moving to kneel beside them. He examined Jeremiah's wound with experienced hands, then met Samuel's desperate gaze. His slight headshake told the boy everything. "No," Samuel whispered. "No, you can't die, not now." Jeremiah reached up with a blood-stained hand to touch his son's face. "Listen to me, Samuel. What I did, trying to sell you, unforgivable." Blood bubbled at the corner of his mouth. "I was lost. After your mother, let darkness take me. I forgive you," Samuel said fiercely, though the words felt hollow even as he spoke them. "Just stay with me." A sad smile crossed Jeremiah's face. "You always were better than me." His gaze shifted to Swift Hawk. "Apache, protect him where I failed." Swift Hawk nodded once, a solemn promise. Jeremiah's eyes returned to his son. "The claim, yours now. Use it better than I did." His breathing became more labored. "Your mother would be proud of who you're becoming." With those words, Jeremiah Wilson's grip on his son's hand weakened, then fell away entirely. His eyes, still fixed on Samuel's face, grew vacant as his last breath escaped in a soft sigh. "Pa," Samuel's voice broke. "Pa!" Jacob moved to place a comforting hand on the boy's shoulder, while Swift Hawk bowed his head in silent respect for the passage of a soul, regardless of its earthly failings. In the crimson light of sunset, as the canyon walls blazed with fire, a boy who had nearly been sold to cover a debt wept over the body of the father who had failed him, yet died trying to redeem himself. And beside him stood an unlikely guardian, a Lipan Apache, whose act of cutting ropes had set in motion events none could have foreseen. The debt was paid, but the true cost was only beginning to be counted. Dawn broke over Rattlesnake Creek with somber light. A small procession wound its way to the hillside cemetery, where Elizabeth Wilson already rested beneath a wooden cross. 4 men carried a simple pine coffin, while behind them walked a solemn-faced boy, flanked by an elderly couple and a tall Apache, whose presence caused uncomfortable shifting among the townspeople gathered to pay their respects. 3 days had passed since Jeremiah Wilson breathed his last in a blood-soaked canyon. 3 days of whispered rumors about a shootout with James Blackwood, who had fled town with a wound in his thigh and murder in his eyes. 3 days of Samuel moving through grief like a sleepwalker, his emotions a complex tangle of anger, sorrow, and guilty relief. "Dust to dust," intoned the traveling preacher, who happened to be passing through Rattlesnake Creek. "The Lord giveth, and the Lord taketh away." Samuel stood rigid beside Martha Turner, whose arm encircled his thin shoulders. He had shed no more tears since that moment in the canyon. His eyes remained dry now, as the first shovelful of dirt struck his father's coffin with a hollow thud. Swift Hawk stood apart from the gathering, observing from beneath the spreading branches of an ancient oak. Though he had helped bring Jeremiah's body back to town and had given testimony to Sheriff Miller about Blackwood's actions, he knew his presence at a white man's funeral would be seen as intrusion by many. As the service concluded and the townspeople began to disperse, Sheriff Miller approached Samuel, hat in hand. "Son, we need to discuss your situation," he said gently. "Your pa's passing leaves certain matters to be settled." Jacob Turner stepped forward protectively. "This can wait, Sheriff. The boy's just buried his father." "I'm afraid it can't," Miller replied, his weathered face grave. "Word came by telegraph this morning. Blackwood's filed legal claim to Wilson's silver mine. Says he has papers showing it was pledged as collateral." Samuel's head snapped up. "That's a lie. Pa never—" He stopped, uncertainty clouding his features. With his father's history of gambling and desperate deals, how could he be sure? "Blackwood's hired a fancy lawyer from Santa Fe," the sheriff continued. "They'll be here tomorrow with a judge to settle the matter." He cleared his throat uncomfortably. "There's also the question of guardianship. With no known kin, the court will need to decide your placement, Samuel." Martha's arm tightened around the boy's shoulders. "We've already decided. Jacob and I will take him in." Sheriff Miller nodded approvingly. "I'll speak for you with the judge, but without legal paper—" He left the implication hanging. From the shade of the oak, Swift Hawk's voice carried across the cemetery. "The boy is Jeremiah Wilson's son. The mine belongs to the boy." All heads turned toward the Apache, who approached with measured steps, his face impassive but his eyes alert to any hostile movement from the gathered townspeople. "That may be," Sheriff Miller replied carefully, "but the law requires proof, documents, witnesses." Swift Hawk reached into a leather pouch at his waist and extracted a folded paper, which he handed to the sheriff. Miller unfolded it, his eyebrows rising in surprise. "This is a deed to the mine signed by Jeremiah Wilson, transferring ownership to Samuel upon his death." The sheriff looked up suspiciously. "Where did you get this, Indian?" "Jeremiah Wilson wrote it as he lay dying," Swift Hawk answered. The blacksmith witnessed. Jacob Turner nodded confirmation. "It's true. Jeremiah asked for paper and pencil, said he wanted to make things right." Sheriff Miller studied the crude document. "I don't know if this will hold up against Blackwood's lawyers, but it's something." He carefully folded the paper and handed it back to Swift Hawk. "Keep this safe until the judge arrives." As the cemetery emptied, Samuel remained before his parents' graves, lost in thought. Swift Hawk waited patiently nearby, his stillness that of a man accustomed to the rhythms of wilderness rather than town. "Did my father truly write that deed?" Samuel finally asked, his voice small but steady. "Or did you create it to help me?" Swift Hawk's expression didn't change. Would the answer change what must be done? Samuel considered this. "I suppose not." He traced the rough letters of his father's name carved into the temporary marker. "Why are you still here? You could have left after the canyon." "I made a promise to your father," Swift Hawk replied simply. "To protect me." Samuel nodded. "But from what?" "Blackwood ran away." Swift Hawk's gaze moved to the distant mountains. "Men like Blackwood do not accept defeat. They return like wounded wolves, more dangerous than before." The boy shivered despite the warm morning. "I'm scared," he admitted, the confession easier to make to this stoic stranger than to the well-meaning Turners. "Not just of Blackwood, of everything. What happens to me now? Where do I belong?" Swift Hawk was silent for a long moment. "When I was younger than you," he finally said, "soldiers came to my village. They killed many, took others away. I hid in a hollow tree for 3 days. When I emerged, everything I knew was gone." His voice held no self-pity, only the simple recounting of facts. "I thought my path had ended. Instead, it had only begun." "What did you do?" Samuel asked, captivated despite his grief. "I followed the signs the land provided. Water, game trails, stars." A hint of something like gentleness softened the Apache's stern features. "Your path continues, Samuel Wilson. Different than before, but not ended." As they made their way back to town, the unlikely pair, a grieving white boy and a Lipan Apache warrior, drew curious stares from those they passed. Martha Turner waited on the porch of the blacksmith's home, her kind face creased with concern. "There's stew on the stove," she called to Samuel. "You need to eat something." Samuel nodded, but hesitated at the bottom of the steps. He turned to Swift Hawk. "Will you come too?" Swift Hawk glanced at Martha, who after only a moment's hesitation nodded her assent. "The man saved your life," she said. "Least we can do is feed him proper." The afternoon passed in quiet conversation around the Turners' kitchen table. Jacob explained the legal proceedings that would take place the following day, while Martha fretted over Samuel's future. Swift Hawk ate silently, observing the family dynamic with interest. If the judge rules in Blackwood's favor, Jacob said grimly. "The mine will be lost, but we'll still petition for guardianship, Samuel. You have a home with us regardless." Samuel pushed his half-eaten stew around his bowl. "The mine is all I have left of Pa. The only good thing he tried to leave me." Martha reached across the table to squeeze his hand. "Your father was a troubled man, child, but in the end, he tried to make amends. Take comfort in that." As dusk approached, Swifthawk rose to leave. "I will return tomorrow when the judge comes." "Where do you stay?" Samuel asked suddenly. "I never thought to ask." "The hills provide shelter," the Apache replied with a slight gesture toward the western ridges. "I am never far." Later that night, as Samuel lay in the small bedroom the Turners had prepared for him, sleep remained elusive. His mind churned with memories, his mother's gentle hands, his father's rare, sober laughter, the terrifying moment when Jeremiah had tightened ropes around his wrists in the town square. And always, returning like a persistent echo, the image of his father's blood spreading across the canyon floor. A soft sound at the window drew him from these dark thoughts. Samuel sat up to find Swifthawk's silhouette framed against the night sky. "Get dressed," the Apache whispered. "Bring warm clothing." "We must go." "Go where?" Samuel asked, already reaching for his pants. Something in Swifthawk's tone brooked no argument. "Blackwood returns. With men. Many men." Swifthawk's voice was urgent but controlled. "They come for the mine. And for you." Fear clutched at Samuel's chest. "How do you know?" "I watched the trails. 6 riders approach from the east. Blackwood leads them." Samuel dressed quickly, stuffing a few possessions into a small sack. "Should we warn the Turners?" Swifthawk nodded. "Wake them quietly. They must leave too. Blackwood will burn their home to find you." The next few minutes passed in a blur of whispered warnings and hurried preparations. Jacob emerged from his bedroom with a shotgun in hand, his expression grim as Swifthawk explained what he had seen. "We'll take the wagon," Jacob decided, his voice low. "Head for Junction City. My brother-in-law is deputy marshal there." "Too slow," Swifthawk countered. "Riders will catch wagon before you reach halfway." Martha appeared, already dressed, a small bundle of food in her arms. "Then what do you suggest?" she asked, her practical nature asserting itself even in crisis. Swifthawk turned to Samuel. "The boy comes with me, into the hills, where horses cannot follow easily." "Absolutely not," Jacob protested. "I'm not sending him off alone with—" He caught himself. "With an Apache?" Swifthawk finished, no emotion coloring his voice. An uncomfortable silence fell. Samuel looked between the adults, sensing the currents of distrust and fear beneath the surface. "I trust Swifthawk," the boy said finally, his young voice steady with conviction. "He saved me twice already, 3 times, counting tonight." Martha and Jacob exchanged troubled glances. "We can't just let you disappear into the wilderness with him," Martha said gently. "What if something happens?" "Something will happen if he stays," Swifthawk replied. "Blackwood does not come to talk. He comes to eliminate witnesses and claim the mine." A distant sound of hoofbeats made the decision for them. Jacob's face hardened as he moved to the window, peering through a crack in the shutters. "Riders coming fast," he confirmed. "At least 6, like he said." He turned to Samuel, indecision warring with practicality on his weathered face. "Maybe the Apache is right. They'll search for you here first." Martha began to cry silently. She pulled Samuel into a fierce embrace. "How you come back to us, you hear, as soon as it's safe." Jacob approached Swifthawk, standing eye to eye with the taller man. "You keep him safe," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "or I'll track you to the ends of the earth." Swifthawk inclined his head slightly, accepting both the threat and the trust it implied. 3 days, he said. "Meet us at the Silver Canyon at moonrise. Bring the sheriff if safe to do so." Samuel hugged the Turners one last time, trying to be brave despite the terror clutching at his heart. Then, with one fluid motion, Swifthawk lifted the boy through the bedroom window and out into the night. They moved quickly through the shadows of Rattlesnake Creek, Swifthawk guiding Samuel with a hand on his shoulder. The sound of hoofbeats grew louder, accompanied now by men's voices calling to one another as they approached the town. "Stay low," Swifthawk instructed as they crept behind the livery stable. "Move only when I move." Samuel nodded, his mouth too dry for speech. He focused on following Swifthawk's silent form, copying his movements as best he could. They had nearly reached the edge of town when a shout went up behind them. "There, by the stables!" A gunshot cracked the night air. Swifthawk pushed Samuel into a shallow drainage ditch, shielding the boy with his body as bullets whined overhead. "Run when I say," the Apache whispered. "Do not stop. Do not look back." Before Samuel could respond, Swifthawk was on his feet, an unearthly war cry tearing from his throat. The sound froze the blood of their pursuers, creating a momentary pause in the gunfire. "Now!" Swifthawk commanded, pulling Samuel up and pushing him toward the darkness beyond the town. Samuel ran as he had never run before, his lungs burning, his legs pumping desperately. Behind him came more gunfire, more shouts. He wanted to look back, to see if Swifthawk followed, but the Apache's instruction rang in his ears. Do not look back. The ground began to slope upward as they reached the foothills. Samuel's pace slowed despite his fear, his breath coming in ragged gasps. A hand gripped his shoulder, nearly causing him to cry out until he recognized Swifthawk's touch. This way, the Apache directed, guiding him toward a narrow trail winding up between boulders. The horses cannot follow here. They climbed in silence, the sounds of pursuit growing fainter below. When they finally paused on a rocky ledge, Samuel collapsed, his legs trembling with exhaustion. Swifthawk crouched beside him, scanning the darkness below with keen eyes. Did they hit you? Samuel managed between gasps for air. Swifthawk shook his head. Their aim is poor in darkness. He handed Samuel a small water skin. Drink, slowly. As the boy sipped the cool water, the reality of his situation began to sink in. He was fleeing into the wilderness with a man he barely knew, hunted by killers, his future uncertain at best. Yet strangely, a calm had settled over him, the calm of having no choice but to move forward. What happens now? He asked, returning the water skin. Swifthawk's gaze moved to the stars overhead, navigating by their familiar patterns. Now we disappear, he said simply, until it is safe to return. Samuel looked back toward Rattlesnake Creek, now just a collection of distant lights in the darkness. Somewhere down there, the Turners might be facing Blackwood's wrath. Somewhere down there lay his parents' graves, the only roots he had left in this world. I'm afraid, he admitted, but not like before. It's different now. Swifthawk nodded, understanding. Before, you feared loss. Now, you feared journey. He stood, offering his hand to the exhausted boy. Come, many miles before dawn. As they continued their ascent into the rugged hills, Samuel felt something unexpected stirring within him. Not just fear or grief, but a fragile seed of something that might, in time, grow into hope. The Apache had cut the ropes that would have bound him to a life of servitude. Now those same hands were guiding him toward whatever lay beyond the darkness. Behind them, Rattlesnake Creek erupted in flames as Blackwood's men torched the blacksmith's shop. But ahead, the vast wilderness offered something Samuel had thought lost forever, a chance to begin anew. For 3 days, Samuel Wilson lived as the Lipan Apache had lived for generations. He learned to move silently through pine forests, to find water in seemingly barren rock faces, to read the stories written in animal tracks and bent grasses. Swifthawk spoke little, but when he did, Samuel listened with an intensity born of both necessity and growing respect. The hawk circles, Swifthawk observed on the morning of the 3rd day, pointing to a dark speck wheeling against the cloudless sky. He sees something we cannot. They crouched on a rocky outcropping that offered a commanding view of the valleys below. In the distance, Rattlesnake Creek was visible as a collection of tiny buildings nestled against the creek that gave the town its name. Thin columns of smoke rose from chimneys, evidence of life continuing despite the violence that had driven Samuel from his home. Do you think the Turners are safe? Samuel asked, shading his eyes against the harsh sun. His fair skin had reddened despite Swifthawk's efforts to keep him in shade, and his clothes bore the marks of their wilderness journey. The blacksmith is strong, smart. Swifthawk's expression revealed nothing of his thoughts. Tonight we will know. Samuel nodded, trying to emulate the Apache's patience. Over the past days he had found himself studying the man's every movement, absorbing lessons that went beyond mere survival. There was a dignity in Swifthawk's bearing, a quiet strength that Samuel had never witnessed in his father or the other men of Rattlesnake Creek. Why did you really help me? Samuel asked abruptly. The question had burned in his mind since that first day in the town square. The truth, not just what you told the Turners or my father. Swifthawk was silent for so long that Samuel thought he might not answer. Finally, the Apache sat cross-legged on the rock, motioning for Samuel to join him. Many winters ago, Swifthawk began, his voice taking on the rhythmic quality of a storyteller. When white settlers first came to our lands, I was a boy younger than you. Soldiers attacked our village while the men were away hunting. They killed the old ones, took the women. His eyes grew distant with memory. I hid in a hollow tree, as I told you. When I emerged, I was alone. Samuel listened, barely breathing. I wandered for days, starving, until I collapsed on a white man's land. This man, Swifthawk made a gesture that suggested a tall, broad figure. He found me. Instead of shooting me or calling soldiers, he carried me to his home. His wife tended my wounds. They fed me, clothed me. A rare softness touched the Apache's stern features. For 3 moons they sheltered me, taught me their words, treated me as son, then helped me find what remained of my people. What happened to them? The white family? Samuel asked. Swift Hawk's expression darkened. Fever took the woman. The man, he lost himself in grief, in the drink. His eyes met Samuel's. Last time I saw him, he was trying to sell his horses for whiskey money, his land fallen to ruin. Understanding dawned on Samuel's face. It was my father, he whispered. The man who helped you was my father. Swift Hawk nodded once. Jeremiah Wilson was a good man once. He saved my life when others of his kind would have taken it. I saw him in you, that day in the square. Not the broken man with the rope, but the man who once had kindness in his heart. Samuel's eyes stung with tears he had thought dried up forever. He never told me, he said, his voice cracking. He never spoke of helping a Lipan boy. The good he did lives on, even if he forgot it himself. Swift Hawk rose to his feet in one fluid motion. Now we prepare. Tonight we meet the blacksmith, or we face Blackwood's men. Either way, we must be ready. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Swift Hawk led Samuel down from their mountain sanctuary, following game trails that would leave minimal signs of their passage. The boy moved with growing confidence, imitating the Apache's careful placement of feet, his controlled breathing. You learn quickly, Swift Hawk observed when they paused at a small stream to drink and refill their water skins. You would have made a good Lipan. Samuel accepted the rare compliment with a nod, recognizing it for the gift it was. What will happen if Blackwood's men find us before the Turners come? Swift Hawk tested the edge of his knife with his thumb. Then we fight, or we disappear deeper into the mountains. He studied Samuel's face. Are you afraid? Samuel considered the question seriously. Yes, he admitted, but not like before. It's different now. Swift Hawk nodded approval at the honest answer. Fear is the shadow of courage. Without one, the other cannot exist. By sunset, they had reached the mouth of the Red Canyon, where Jeremiah Wilson's silver claim lay. Swift Hawk instructed Samuel to wait in a sheltered crevice while he scouted the area, disappearing like a shadow among the darkening rocks. Alone, Samuel huddled in the narrow space, listening to the sounds of the desert night awakening around him. Coyotes called in the distance, their eerie voices echoing off the canyon walls. An owl hooted from a nearby juniper, while smaller creatures rustled in the undergrowth. Swift Hawk returned as silently as he had left. The mine entrance is watched, he reported. 2 men with rifles. Samuel's heart sank. Blackwood's men? Yes. They wait in ambush. Swift Hawk's expression was grim. The Turners may already be captured, or dead. We have to help them. Samuel started to rise, but Swift Hawk's hand on his shoulder kept him in place. First we know what we face, the Apache said firmly. How many enemies? Where positioned? What weapons? As Swift Hawk outlined his reconnaissance findings, a plan began to form. The 2 guards at the mine entrance were merely the visible threat. 3 more men were concealed among the boulders near the canyon entrance, waiting to close a trap once victims entered. Blackwood himself? Samuel asked. Not seen. Perhaps in town. Perhaps hidden elsewhere. Swift Hawk's eyes glinted in the gathering darkness. We must move the odds in our favor before the moon rises. What followed was a masterclass in Apache warfare. Swift Hawk collected specific plants, grinding their leaves between stones to create a pungent paste that he applied to arrowheads. He showed Samuel how to create false tracks leading in the wrong direction, how to use the wind to carry sounds away from listening ears. When the owl calls 3 times, Swift Hawk instructed, drop to the ground. No matter what you hear, do not move until I come for you. Samuel nodded, fighting to control his trembling hands. The weight of the small knife Swift Hawk had given him felt strange at his belt, but somehow reassuring. Darkness had fully claimed the canyon when they began their approach. Moving from shadow to shadow, they worked their way closer to the mine entrance where Jeremiah Wilson had died. The silver that had cost the man his life now drew new predators, waiting to claim it by force. Swift Hawk's hand signal stopped Samuel behind a boulder. Ahead, the faint glow of a cigarette revealed one of the guards, a dark silhouette against the lighter stone of the canyon wall. The Apache melted into the darkness, leaving Samuel alone. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as the boy waited, every sense straining. Then from somewhere to his left came the soft hoot of an owl. Once, twice, 3 times. Samuel dropped flat to the ground as instructed. Seconds later, a piercing scream shattered the night's silence, followed by shouted curses and the thunder of gunfire. Men's voices called to each other in confusion and alarm. It came from the North Ridge. Jenkins is down! Something got Jenkins! Apache! It's a damned Apache! More gunfire erupted, but it seemed to come from multiple directions now. Swift Hawk was creating the illusion of a larger attacking force, drawing the ambushers away from their positions. Samuel pressed his face against the cool earth, heart hammering in his chest. A man ran past his hiding place so close that the boy could smell tobacco and sweat. The guard never saw the shadow that detached itself from the rocks behind him. There was a brief struggle, a muffled cry, then silence. More gunfire in the distance, more shouts now tinged with panic. "Fall back to the mine! Fall back!" Running footsteps approached. Samuel tensed, gripping his knife, but it was Swift Hawk who appeared, signaling for him to remain still. The Apache carried a rifle now, acquired from one of the guards. "Two down," he whispered. "Three running. Now we wait." They didn't wait long. The distinctive sound of wagon wheels grinding over rocky ground echoed through the canyon, accompanied by the jingle of harnesses and the snort of horses. Light from lanterns spilled around the bend, illuminating the canyon walls with dancing shadows. "The Turners?" Samuel breathed hopefully. Swift Hawk's expression remained cautious. "Perhaps, or reinforcements for our enemies." The wagon came into view, driven by Jacob Turner. Beside him sat Martha, her normally neat hair escaping its pins, and Sheriff Miller, shotgun at the ready. Behind them rode two mounted men that Samuel didn't recognize, rifles across their saddles. "Marshal's deputies," Swift Hawk identified them. "From Junction City." Only then did he relax slightly. "Come, but stay behind me." They emerged from hiding, Swift Hawk with his hands clearly visible, knowing the danger of surprising armed men at night. "Turner," he called softly. The wagon halted. Jacob raised his lantern, its light catching the Apache's distinctive silhouette. "Swift Hawk, is Samuel with you?" "I'm here." Samuel couldn't contain himself, darting out from behind Swift Hawk's protective stance. "I'm here, Mr. Turner." Martha's cry of relief was followed by her practically falling from the wagon in her haste to reach the boy. She enveloped Samuel in a fierce embrace, her body shaking with emotion. "Thank God," she whispered against his hair. "We feared the worst when we found those men Blackwood left behind." Sheriff Miller and the deputies approached more cautiously, eyes scanning the darkness for threats. "We've got 3 of Blackwood's men in custody back in town," Miller informed them. "Caught them trying to burn down my office after they finished with your shop, Turner." Jacob's face was grim in the lantern light. "Whole place is gone, forge, tools, everything." "You're alive," Samuel said firmly. "That's what matters." Swift Hawk had been examining the ground near the mine entrance. He straightened suddenly, eyes alert. "Where is Blackwood?" he asked sharply. "Slipped away before we could arrest him," one of the deputies answered. "Heading south, according to witnesses." Swift Hawk shook his head. "He is here." He pointed to fresh tracks partially obscured by the guards' boot prints. Inside the mine, Sheriff Miller raised his lantern higher, revealing the dark mouth of the tunnel where Jeremiah Wilson had died. "Are you sure, Indian?" Before Swift Hawk could answer, the distinctive metallic click of a gun being cocked echoed from the mine entrance. "Quite sure," came James Blackwood's cultured southern drawl, "and I must commend the Apache's tracking skills. Most impressive." Blackwood emerged from the shadows, his elegant appearance somewhat diminished by trail dust, and a blood-stained bandage visible beneath his torn trouser leg where Swift Hawk's arrow had struck days earlier. But the silver-plated pistol in his hand was steady, aimed directly at Samuel. "What a touching reunion," he said mockingly. The boy, his savior, and his would-be foster family, along with law enforcement no less. How convenient that all my obstacles arrive in one neat package. The deputies started to raise their rifles, but Blackwood's next words froze them. "I wouldn't. My finger is rather sensitive on this trigger, and young Samuel here would be the first to fall." "It's over, Blackwood," Sheriff Miller said firmly. "Your men are in custody. Judge Reynolds knows everything. The illegal gambling, the extortion, the murder of Wilson." Blackwood's smile never reached his cold eyes. "Details that would be difficult to prove without witnesses." His gaze fixed on Samuel. "One final loose end to tie up, and I'll be on my way to more civilized territories with enough silver ore to start anew." Martha tightened her arms around Samuel protectively. Jacob stepped forward, placing himself partially between Blackwood and his wife and the boy. "The only place you're going is a territorial prison," the blacksmith growled. Blackwood sighed theatrically. "Your optimism is charming but misplaced." His expression hardened. "Now everyone drop your weapons, slowly." No one moved. The standoff stretched, tension crackling in the night air. Swift Hawk stood motionless, his dark eyes never leaving Blackwood's face. Samuel could sense the Apache gathering himself, like a mountain lion before pouncing. "Don't be foolish," Blackwood warned. "One shot will bring my remaining men running." "Your remaining men are either dead or captured," Sheriff Miller replied. "It's finished." Something dangerous flashed in Blackwood's eyes. "Nothing is finished until I say it is." His finger tightened on the trigger. What happened next occurred so quickly that Samuel could barely process it. Swifthawk's arm moved in a blur, a knife appearing as if by magic. The blade whistled through the air, striking Blackwood's gun hand with surgical precision. The gambler screamed, his pistol discharging harmlessly into the ground as it fell from his crippled fingers. In the chaos that followed, Samuel found himself pushed to the ground, Martha's body shielding his, as the deputies and Sheriff Miller rushed forward. Jacob and Swifthawk moved as one, the blacksmith's massive fist connecting with Blackwood's jaw as the Apache smoothly disarmed him. Within moments, Blackwood was subdued, his hands bound behind him with the same coarse rope he had planned to use on his victims. Blood dripped from his wounded hand where Swifthawk's knife protruded, but no one moved to remove it. "You've ruined me," Blackwood spat, his refined facade cracking to reveal the vicious predator beneath, his hateful gaze fixed on Samuel. All for a worthless boy who should have been sold to cover his drunkard father's debts. Samuel rose to his feet, Martha's steadying hand on his shoulder. He approached Blackwood, stopping just beyond reach of the bound man. For a moment he studied the gambler's contorted face, seeing clearly for the first time the same hollow greed that had consumed his father, but without the final redeeming flicker of humanity that Jeremiah had shown in his dying moments. "My father made terrible mistakes," Samuel said quietly, "but in the end he tried to protect me. You're the one who's worthless, Mr. Blackwood." Sheriff Miller nodded to the deputies. "Get him on his feet. We'll take him back to town for the judge to deal with in the morning." As Blackwood was hauled away, cursing and threatening, Samuel felt a strange sense of completion wash over him. He turned to find Swifthawk watching him, something like approval in the Apache's typically stoic expression. "The circle closes," Swifthawk said simply. Dawn was breaking as they gathered in what remained of the Turner's blacksmith shop. The forge and workshop had been destroyed by fire, but the living quarters at the back had survived, albeit smoke-damaged. Martha busied herself preparing a simple breakfast, while Jacob and Sheriff Miller discussed the legal proceedings that would follow. "Judge Reynolds is a fair man," Miller was saying. "With my testimony and the deputies as witnesses, Blackwood will hang for Wilson's murder. As for the mine, that deed Swifthawk saved should be enough to secure it as Samuel's inheritance. Not much use to a boy with no way to work it," Jacob pointed out practically. Samuel sat quietly at the table, exhaustion finally catching up with him after days of tension and fear. Swifthawk stood near the doorway, as if reluctant to fully enter this domestic scene. "You'll stay with us, of course," Martha said to Samuel, setting a plate before him. "Once we rebuild the shop." Samuel looked up. "You'd still take me in, even after everything that's happened?" Jacob's weathered face softened. "Boy, you're family now. Trouble comes with the territory." Samuel's throat tightened with emotion. He glanced towards Swifthawk, who had observed the exchange in silence. "What about you?" he asked the Apache. "Where will you go now?" Swifthawk's gaze moved toward the eastern window, where the rising sun painted the sky in brilliant hues of gold and crimson. "My people camp in the high valleys during summer. I will return to them." A profound sadness filled Samuel at these words, though he understood their inevitability. Swifthawk belonged to a different world, one that white civilization was systematically destroying, despite the efforts of individuals like the Turners. "Will I ever see you again?" Samuel asked, unable to hide the tremor in his voice. Swifthawk studied the boy for a long moment. "The silver in your father's mine," he said. "It can rebuild the blacksmith's shop better than before, with enough left to secure your future." Jacob and Martha exchanged surprised glances at this apparent change of subject. "What are you saying?" Jacob asked. "I am saying," Swifthawk continued, "that I will help work the mine. For 6 moons, my share will go to rebuilding what Blackwood destroyed." His eyes held Jacob's. "You will teach the boy your craft. I will teach him the ways of my people when time allows." Samuel could hardly believe what he was hearing. "You're staying? For 6 months?" Swifthawk's expression remained impassive, but something like amusement flickered in his dark eyes. "The debt is not yet fully paid. Your father saved my life once. I have saved yours. But there is more to teach than just survival." Martha wiped tears from her eyes with the corner of her apron. "You'd be welcome here," she said simply, "for as long as you choose." Jacob rose and extended his hand to Swifthawk, a gesture of equality rare between white settlers and Native Americans in that time and place. After a moment's hesitation, the Apache clasped it firmly. "Partners, then," Jacob said. Swifthawk nodded once. "Partners." As the adults discussed practical arrangements, Samuel slipped outside into the early morning light. The town of Rattlesnake Creek was awakening around him, smoke rising from chimneys, shopkeepers sweeping their porches. Life continuing as it always did, even after tragedy and upheaval. He made his way to the small cemetery on the hillside, standing between his parents' graves in the golden morning light. The events of the past days felt simultaneously like a lifetime and like moments ago. His father's desperate attempt to sell him, the ropes around his wrists, Swifthawk's unexpected intervention that had changed everything. "I wish you could have stayed the man who saved him," Samuel whispered to his father's grave. "I wish you could have found your way back from the darkness." A shadow fell across the graves as Swifthawk approached silently. He stood beside Samuel, offering his presence without words. "My father saved your life," Samuel said after a while, "and then tried to sell mine." Swifthawk nodded. "All men contain both light and shadow. Your father let his shadow grow too strong." He placed a hand briefly on Samuel's shoulder. "But his final act was of light. Remember this." They stood together as the sun climbed higher, casting their shadows long across the desert soil, a Lipan Apache warrior and a white boy united by an unlikely bond forged in violence, but promising something better. "The ropes are cut," Swifthawk said softly. "Now your true path begins." Samuel nodded, understanding the deeper meaning in the Apache's words. The ropes of his father's failings, of Blackwood's evil intentions, of his own fear and uncertainty, all had been severed. What remained was the freedom to forge a new way forward, guided by better hands than those that had tried to bind him. As they walked back toward town side by side, Samuel realized that in losing everything, he had somehow gained something precious and rare, not just a new family in the Turners, but a connection to a world and wisdom he would never have known otherwise. The Apache who had cut the ropes had not just saved a boy from bondage, he had opened the door to an unexpected future, where two worlds might meet in understanding rather than bloodshed. It was a small beginning, as fragile as the first green shoot after a prairie fire, but it carried the promise of growth and renewal, and for Samuel Wilson, walking beside the Lipan warrior who had changed his fate, that promise was enough.